collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
On this week's programme, yet another protected site comes under threat as the Cabinet ignores the recommendations of the Department of the Environment to forge ahead with plans for a new highway.
I think the key point to make here is that while there probably is an argument for an upgrade, there really isn't a justification for a highway, and in particular a highway going through a protected site.
And the Food Print project aims to tackle the wastage of food in our restaurants and hotels.
It is important to change the way that we buy, the way we consume, the way we cook, and the way that we consider the food resources unlimited.
Last week, the Cabinet decided to go ahead with the construction of a mountain road, in the process ignoring the Environment Department's own warnings that it was not a good idea. There are many reasons for that, one of which is to do with the biodiversity and particularly the birds in the Natura 2000 area. Joining us to discuss this issue from BirdLife Cyprus is Martin Helikar. Martin, extraordinary to me that if the Environment Department says this is not a good idea, the Cabinet just goes ahead and agrees to do it anyway.
Yes, we would have to agree as BirdLife Cyprus that this is a very bad move on the part of our ministers and the part of the Cabinet to override the decision of their environmental experts, the Environment Department, which was clearly, they were very clear in saying that there would be significant and irreversible impacts on the biodiversity and specifically the species for which the Natura 2000 site of Atsas Ayos Theodoros is designated. The road, the highway, we speak of a 4-lane highway, will bisect this Natura 2000 site. It will cut through it and cut through a part of that site that is very important, in particular for the stone curlew, a nocturnal species, and for the roller, a migrant breeder and a threatened species that Cyprus holds an important population of. It's also an area that's very important for the woodlark, another designation species, as we say, in the winter. So yeah, a very regrettable move from the Cabinet indeed.
Now, what is the position when it comes to the European Union and its regulations with regard to Natura sites?
That's the key question, I think, here. So, as we know, Natura 2000 sites, which are designated for birds and for habitats and for other species, are not areas where development is completely banned. However, there is a very specific process that has to be gone through by member states before a development that could have impact on the conservation targets of the Natura 2000 site can be approved. That process was indeed followed. It hasn't been completed, I should add. The decision from the Cabinet comes before the government departments have even completed that assessment process. And the conclusion of the key part of that process, step one of that process, which is the so-called appropriate assessment for such projects, was, as I said earlier, and as you said in your introduction, Rosie, that there will be significant impact on that Natura 2000 site. Now, there is an opening, if you like, in the relevant EU directives that says where a project has been assessed to have significant impact, but despite this, there are overriding reasons of public interest to do with public safety, for example, for which the government, the member state, considers that a project must nonetheless go ahead. That can be done. That can be done in exceptional circumstances, but this has to be justified to the European Commission.
It'll be interesting to see how on earth they do justify it, because I've seen a lot of articles suggesting that the particular stretch, I think around 11 kilometres they're talking about, and where it's located, is not actually going to benefit, for the most part, the people who use that road, because the congestion isn't in the area where this highway is going to be built. So if it is moved to a little bit further up, where apparently there is a traffic problem and possibly, I don't know, a road safety problem, would that be in the Natura site as well?
Yeah, there isn't room, if you like, within the Natura 2000 site to relocate this road. The Natura 2000 site extends right up to the buffer zone. Obviously, a new road can't really go into the buffer zone. So there isn't room for relocating it somewhere where it won't be in the Natura 2000 site. The argument that the Cabinet is using is that this is important for people living in mountain communities, and it's important for road safety. Our position as BirdLife Cyprus is that the current road could and indeed should be upgraded, but there's a big difference between upgrading a two-lane road, which does at times have some traffic, but not always by any means. Upgrading it by straightening some sections or widening some sections, and there's a big difference between that, which can be done with relatively low impact, and putting in another highway. We already have more highways per square mile, per square kilometre than any other country in the European Union. This is part of a bigger plan to build a highway from Nicosia up to the mountains, and this is another section that's being done. One of the problems with the approach is that it's being done bit by bit and being assessed section by section, salami tactics, as they're called, whereas actually the assessment should be for the whole road as it's planned for in the future. But I think the key point to make here is that while there probably is an argument for an upgrade, there really isn't a justification for a highway, and in particular a highway going through a protected site.
Yeah, and they're talking about underpasses and roundabouts and goodness knows what. Let me just ask you if the timing seems to you to be of note, because it does seem to me that whenever there are elections in the offing, whoever is in the government at the time seems to suddenly get a thing about building more roads.
I would agree. It's not something that I would comment on as BirdLife Cyprus, but certainly I would agree that that seems to be the pattern. I think what is sad is that the idea of development in Cyprus still focuses on roads and buildings, whereas in actual fact, development can and should include protection of key sites. Protecting some of our best natural areas should be part of the development tactic, the development strategy going forward. BirdLife Cyprus is not against roads, it's not against buildings, as long as they're done in the right way. This road, yes, it should and can be upgraded, but it needs to be done in a way that does not significantly impact on a designated protected site. One of the things that Cyprus has to convince the European Commission on is that all alternatives have been fully examined and that there wasn't a better alternative. I really don't see how the Cabinet is going to be able to do that. So in practice, that job is going to land on the doorstep of the Environment Department, the same Environment Department whose assessment process correctly, if you ask me, in BirdLife Cyprus, concluded that this road would have significant impact. So effectively, the Environment Department said this should not go ahead. The Cabinet is overriding that for very dubious reasons of public interest. In fact, we've seen from the announcement, and I find this particularly disappointing, not to say shocking, that the Cabinet has decided to adopt the position of the consultancy that was asked to assess this project, which was erroneously and based on very bad arguments and data, that there wouldn't be an assessment. decided to put that assessment above the assessment of the Agriculture Ministry's Environment Department, so above the assessment of the body that is charged with properly protecting and managing our countryside.
Yes, and it does seem again to raise the question, which seems to come up almost every time we talk, about who carries out environmental impact assessments and what their connections may be with either construction companies, politically exposed persons perhaps, or anybody else who might have an interest in this going ahead.
That's absolutely true, unfortunately, and the quality of the assessment studies that are done varies widely. Some of them are really good and do a proper job, and some of them are, to be frank, rubbish. And it is the job of the Environment Department to raise the quality of those. In this case, the Environment Department basically, without actually using these words, did assess that this was a rubbish assessment and made its own assessment with the help of experts on the relevant committee, which was a correct assessment, as we've said lots of times already, that there will be significant impact from this proposed road.
Yeah, one of the things that the Cabinet said, I think, when it announced this, was that it would be a good thing for the economic development, social coherence or cohesion, and the upgrading of the quality of life of the residents of the broader area. Do we have any idea how many residents there are in this broader area? It's not a highly populated area, is it?
It isn't. The argument of the Cabinet is that we want to keep people in the countryside, and of course I would agree with that 100%. I would just disagree that more roads are the way to do it. I think protecting natural areas and managing them properly so they become a key part of our domestic and foreign tourism products, and supporting rural communities effectively, not just with tarmac, but by actually encouraging sustainable tourism and creating green jobs in the countryside, which is a policy that is being promoted across the European Union. And Cyprus has been very slow to take up. We're still stuck on the idea that development equals roads. We need to get over that. We need to understand and appreciate that there is a better way of looking at these things, a more sustainable way of looking at these things, and the protection can be developed. I think the most worrying thing from BirdLife Cyprus' point of view is that this is part of a pattern. The recourse from the Cabinet to reasons of so-called overriding public interest is an excuse that's been used in the case of the Paphos-Polis highway, which is a far more destructive development proposal than the one we're discussing right now, and also in the case of the marina and giant hotel being built in the Agia Thekla area towards Ayanapa. All of these are within protected sites. They don't pass the assessment, the environmental assessment, but the Cabinet decides to use this get-out-of-jail-free card, if you like, of saying, well, it's of overriding public interest for economic reasons or for safety reasons.
Do you think they'll get it past the Commission in this case?
I hope not. I think the Commission should do its job, and the Commission should reply to the government that, no, this doesn't wash, and you need to look at alternatives, because they have not fully examined alternatives. And an alternative might always be simply not to do that development, but to help the economic prosperity of the areas that the Cabinet is saying they want to help in other ways, in the ways that we've just mentioned.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that if you look at the plans of the Deputy Ministry of Tourism talking about getting back to Cypriot things, if you talk to tourists who hire cars, they don't want to go on highways. They want to drive those lovely mountain roads through the olive groves and the vineyards. They want to see Cyprus as it used to be. So in a sense, it would be counterproductive, would it not, to suggest that their route up to the mountains would take a little bit less time if they're on a 4-lane highway?
I agree 100%. And the time saved is a matter of minutes. And I think, as you say, whether we're talking about tourists who come from Europe or further afield, or whether we're talking about, domestic tourists who want to go from a town to the countryside, taking that windy road and going a bit slower is very much part of what people want.
Very
the
much.
idea that people just want highways is wrong. It's outdated. We need to move with the times, and we need to move towards sustainability and a proper model of real development rather than just more concrete and tarmac.
Let's hope we get there one day, and it better be sooner rather than later, otherwise there won't be much countryside left to destroy. Martin Helikar from BirdLife Cyprus, many thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Rosie.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Moloch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
We talked on the programme a few weeks ago about food waste. Well, a new project has been launched in Cyprus called Life Food Print. It's organised by OEV, the Employers and Industrialists Federation, and the Director of Energy at their Environment Department is Anthi Haralambous. Anthi, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do at the Environment Department of OEV and why it is that this project and the survey that you've done is going to hopefully change the way we throw away food here in Cyprus.
I would like to say a few words about our department at OEB. The department was established in 2016 and aims to promote the environmental and energy issues among the members and the economy and the society. We run several projects aiming at the promotion of renewable energy sources, energy efficiency in SMEs, blue energy, biofuels, as well as environmental projects like the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in businesses in Cyprus. We have two projects. One is related with hotels, and we are trying to further promote actions that aim at reducing the greenhouse gases at hotel industry, as well as all the businesses through the Business for Climate project. The footprint is one project that started in October 2020. It's a project that is co-financed by the LIFE program of the European Commission and aims at promoting the minimization of food waste. So the slogan of the project is Save Food Waste Less. So in December and January this year, OEB carried out a survey aiming at identifying the food waste from hotels, restaurants, and other food industries in Cyprus. This month, we carry out consultations to identify problems related with this topic, not only with waste management, organic waste management, but also how to eliminate the waste food. So we have the results of this study, and I would like to mention the several important impacts related with food waste. So we have environmental impact, cultural, we have social and also economic. Because, growing more food, this has more pressure on the environment, the water usage, the use of energy in agriculture, the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, and also if we don't produce locally the food, you can understand that the transportation of food from one continent to the other involves a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, so the carbon footprint is quite high. Also, the cultural differences among countries is an important factor because there are countries where people order or buy or cook the quantities of food that are absolutely necessary. In Cyprus, our culture is a bit different, so I think we have to eliminate a little bit through awareness campaigns and through changing the behavior of customers, so having more the economy of sharing or the takeaway or other activities that can eliminate the food waste. I would like to mention that we speak about the food waste while more than 16 million of European citizens, they need food support, and also 79 million of European citizens, they live below the poverty line. But also the economic implications are related with a loss of resources and, of course, money. And also we have an increased waste management cost. So going to the results of our research, it is important to mention that the hotels and restaurants in Cyprus normally do not suggest to the customers to take away the remaining quantities of food. And they do that sometimes when this is asked by the customers. And only 6% of the companies participated in the survey, they proposed to the customers to take the food at home, so can be consumed the next day. And there are some other health and safety, of course, implications.
Yeah, but can I just ask you about the results of the survey? Because I looked at the figures and they were horrific. 70% of a portion of a fish dish is thrown away. Now, that could easily be taken home and reheated and eaten up the next day. And if you look at the quantities, very many of them are almost half of a portion not consumed. The bottom line surely is that here in Cyprus, we make the portions far too big.
That's right. You put it in the right way, because it's not only the fish, but also the bakery, like bread and these materials that accompany the food also are wasted 45%, as well as the fruits and vegetables, 50%, which means that normally we put in our dish not the quantities that we need to cover our needs. And it is also important that the 3% of the prepared dishes for, let's say, breakfast in restaurants and hotels, the 3% which are prepared, they are wasted. It's a quite high quantity. But also I would like to mention something about the waste management, the current practices, which are related with how the companies manage the food waste. And it is important to say that none of the companies participated in the survey. They have a small or large composting facility in the business. And also it's important to say that the 12% is given to the social, let's say, centers, or the 70% goes to the animals. But there are a lot of things to do if we look at the figures and if we consider all these implications and the impacts I mentioned at the beginning. It is important to change the way that we buy, the way we consume, the way we cook, and the way that we consider the food resources unlimited.
What did the hotels themselves come up with as possible solutions to this? Because if we're looking at not only the quantities they buy, it's also whether or not their storing methods are correct so that food doesn't go off before it's prepared.
That's right. You are right, yes. With hotels, we had several consultations, and we have identified one very important problem. Many of our hotels are all-inclusive hotels. So when the customers, through the tour operators, buy a package that includes, full board, they have the attitude that I have paid for it, so I will consume as much as I want, and I can waste as much as I want. And this is something that our hotel tries to do it with several signs and notifications that food is a resource, that we should not waste it, and other actions. But it is impossible, especially if we have tourists in Cyprus coming from some cultures. That's why I mentioned from the beginning that the culture of people or of our tourists is important. Because if we don't understand that if we put in our dish more quantity than that we can consume, this will be wasted. So it's a wasted resource, no matter if I have paid for it or not.
Right, so it's a change of culture that we need, but it's also surely a change, and you say it's in tourists, but if you go to, for example, buffet dinners here in Cyprus, and the Cypriots do tend to pile their plates very high, mix it all up, and then half of it goes back to the kitchen and presumably in the bin.
That's right, it's a matter of culture. That's why I said that from the beginning. It's a matter of culture, it's the way that we learn how to consume things. Do you know that some years ago we had the sharing economy, which we don't see today? The sharing economy, if you don't go far, in some rural areas where if you produce something or if you have a remaining cake of the day, you give it to the neighbor. The sharing economy, which is part of the circular economy, that's why the people need to change the way of thinking. And I think projects like the Footprint are important because aim at awareness campaigns. And it is important that at least we will try to change the purchasing basket or the way that we consume or order when we go to restaurants and hotels. In this project also we will develop a good practices guide where we will mention some, for instance, hotels in Europe that they promote the environmental friendly way that they produce breakfast and food, that they have eliminated not only the quantity of food but also promoting local products and also eliminating the packaging of all this food, because it's not only the food. There are many other problems associated, environmental problems with this way. So it's a resources waste.
All right, Anthony, we're going to have to wrap this up because we're running out of time. But will you be, as OEV, doing another research perhaps later this year to see whether or not the project has borne fruit, as it were, and that these figures of wastage have come down?
Yeah, that's right. Next year we aim to do the same. Also in households and enterprises, in businesses, and to see if all these campaigns had some positive effects.
Well, we certainly hope that they will. The one thing we didn't have time to talk about, of course, is the effect that all this overconsumption has on our health and obesity, because there was a report recently that a lot of people in Cyprus, and I'm sure all over the world, are overweight. We've been talking to Anthi Charalambous, Director of Energy at the Environment Department of the Employers and Industrialists Federation, about their life foodprint research on food waste.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.